Savannah, Georgia, March 1859. They called it the Weeping Time, the largest sale of enslaved people in American history. 436 men, women, and children divided into lots, cataloged like furniture, assigned prices like tools. The sound of the auctioneer's voice cutting through the storm, steady and professional, while outside the heavens opened up, as if the sky itself refused to bear witness. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure you've subscribed to the Macabre History. On our channel, we uncover the dark truths of America that have been buried for generations. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Imagine standing there shackled as men in fine coats bid on your worth, your daughter's worth. Imagine watching the man who once shared your prayers, your laughter, your blood, sold to a different owner. The rain soaked everything, but it could not wash the blood from the soil. But here's what they don't tell you, what the textbooks soften, what the museums whisper. This wasn't chaos. It was precision, an organized mechanism of control. The auction was the visible face of an invisible empire, a network of financial, political, and religious systems working together to keep human beings as assets. And that empire didn't die in 1859. It simply changed form. Every document, every ledger, every whispered deal between planters and bankers fed into the same machine. Ownership disguised as order. The same mathematical cruelty that turned people into property now hides behind laws, corporations, and ideologies, polished forms of the same ancient corruption. They say the rain didn't stop for 2 days. Some called it divine punishment. Others said it was a curse. But the truth, it was a cleansing that never finished its work. Because the men who ran that auction didn't vanish. They became senators, bankers, trustees. The wealth from that day was invested, multiplied, institutionalized. The blood became paper, the paper became law, and the law became the foundation you still walk upon. This story isn't about history. It's about inheritance. You are living inside the architecture of that auction. You just don't see the chains anymore. And tonight, we'll make them visible again. The auction was only the stage. The actors, the voices, the tears, they were the distraction. Behind the curtain, men in fine suits and quiet parlors played a different game, one of numbers, ownership, and divine justification. They weren't shouting prices, they were writing the rules. The year was 1859, but the architecture was older, centuries older. The men who orchestrated the Weeping Time were heirs to an ancient system, commerce through control. They studied in Europe, corresponded with British financiers, prayed in churches that preached obedience while investing in bondage. Every sale was a data point, every person reduced to a yield percentage, every child born into slavery a future return on investment. This wasn't merely Southern greed, it was an experiment in human economics, the deliberate reduction of soul into currency. Savannah's auction was not the beginning, nor the end. It was a culmination, the perfection of a formula written by empires and sanctified by pulpits. You see, behind every whip there was a ledger, behind every field a bank, and behind every bank a philosophy, that humanity itself could be owned, shaped, priced, that power wasn't measured in compassion but in control. The Pierce M. Butler estate, the owners of those 436 souls, had inherited not just land, but a system built on illusion. The illusion that order justified cruelty, that property rights could cleanse conscience. But when Butler's debts mounted, he turned to liquidation, and that liquidation became the largest human sale in U.S. history. Now here's the quiet horror. The very banks that financed Butler's debts would later revolve into the same institutions that anchor America's economy today. Names have changed, logos have changed, but the roots remain. The wealth from human bodies flowed upward, branched out, and solidified into the pillars of modern finance. So when you swipe a card, sign a contract, or step into a marble-lobbied institution, remember, you are standing in the shadow of those rain-soaked tents. The system didn't die when slavery ended. It adapted. Chains turned into debt. Ownership became employment, and compliance was rebranded as freedom. They never stopped the auction. They just moved it indoors. And as we descend further, you'll see how that system, refined, sanitized, globalized, still controls you without chains, without masters, without visible whips. Because the most perfect slavery is the one that convinces you you're free. They said the prayers before the bidding began. Clergy stood beside merchants, invoking divine order over the sale of flesh. God wills the strong to guide the weak, they whispered, twisting faith into a blade that cut through conscience. In 1859 Savannah, the church was not merely a witness, it was an engine. From the pulpits, preachers wrapped slavery in scripture, quoting verses about servants and masters, order and obedience. They told planters that hierarchy was holy, that profit was proof of divine favor, that bondage was mercy, so long as it was done in Christian spirit. And the people believed, not because they were all cruel, but because they were trained not to see. Faith was their blindfold, tied carefully by the very hands that profited from their trust. The same voices that promised heaven were also auctioning souls beneath its symbol. It wasn't just about control, it was about absolution. If God could be made to bless the system, no one needed to feel guilt. Plantation owners could kneel on Sunday, wash their hands in holy water, and return on Monday to the fields, certain that they were righteous. But this was more than a southern delusion. Across oceans and centuries, religion had long been used to justify empire, conquest, and servitude. The Roman Church sanctified colonization. The crown invoked divine mandate. Every chain, every conquest, every whip cracked beneath a flag embroidered with holy words. What made Savannah different was not the theology, it was the scale of denial. A civilization so desperate to appear moral that it built its sins into its prayers. And when emancipation came, the same system shifted shape again. The pulpits began to preach reconciliation, not justice. Forgiveness, not repair. The message was clear: forget, move on, leave the past buried, even if it still bled. That's how systems survive, not by violence alone, but by sanctifying memory itself, turning atrocity into abstraction, history into myth. And that's why the weeping time was almost erased, because acknowledging it would expose something far more dangerous than cruelty. It would expose design. The world isn't run by monsters hiding in shadows. It's built by ordinary people following rules written by those who knew how to use belief as a leash. So ask yourself, What beliefs keep you obedient today? Whose profit depends on your faith that the system is fair? When the last body was sold and the rain began to fade, a new altar was already being built, not of stone or gold, but of numbers. The great replacement of faith had begun. Where once men bowed before crosses, they now bowed before ledgers. The divine right of kings had become the divine right of capital. And those who once justified bondage through scripture began to justify it through economics. The plantation evolved into the corporation. The overseer became the manager. The chains became contracts, binding not wrists but futures. And Savannah's fields of blood quietly transformed into America's banks, ports, and factories. Money, unlike God, required no moral defense. It was a cleaner master. It didn't ask for prayer, only participation. All it needed was your belief in its power. And believe they did. The same men who once stood under the reign of the weeping time found salvation in the age of industry. Their profits became foundations, their names etched on buildings, their descendants invited into the highest circles of influence. The Butler estate, the financiers, the insurers, they didn't vanish into history. They evolved into trustees, investors, policymakers. And their silent creed was simple. The value of a human is measurable. Labor became currency. Productivity became virtue. And so, in the name of progress, the machine that once traded bodies simply recalibrated itself to trade lives. Look closely at the roots of major American banks, at the wealth that seeded early universities, at the endowments that built the new world. You will find the echo of that reign, the sound of bids placed over human souls. The system didn't die, it shed its skin. What was once justified by God was now justified by growth. And yet the psychology remained, that the worth of a man is determined by his output, that comfort and power belong only to those who obey the rules of the marketplace, the new sanctuary. In this new faith, silence is worship, debt is devotion, competition is communion. And those who question the order, who dare to ask where the wealth began, are branded heretics, dreamers, or worse, ungrateful. But here's the truth buried beneath the numbers. The market was never free. It was born from bondage, baptized in blood, and dressed in respectability. Every system of control needs belief to survive. Religion once provided it. Now, money does. And the moment you stop believing in its holiness, the illusion begins to crack. After the smoke of the Civil War cleared, the world didn't rebuild from ash, it reorganized from memory. The fields were burned, but the minds of men were still owned. And ownership, as history teaches, doesn't always require chains. Sometimes, all it takes is curriculum. In the decades that followed 1859, America began a quiet campaign, not of violence, but of narrative. Schools rose where plantations once stood, their lessons polished and selective. Children were taught about freedom, but not about who paid for it. The story of the weeping time disappeared from textbooks, replaced with a more convenient myth that progress was natural, inevitable, and righteous. History wasn't erased, it was managed. Because memory is power, and those who write the past define the future. Textbooks praise the self-made man, the industrial titan, the genius entrepreneur, men whose fortunes had been fertilized by human suffering. Universities, funded by old slave prophets, taught economics as science, not morality. They spoke of markets as divine systems, efficient, fair, impartial. But beneath the formulas lay the same ancient premise, that hierarchy is destiny. Then came politics. Freed slaves were given the right to vote, only to be stripped of it by new laws crafted with lawyerly precision. Property qualifications, literacy tests, poll taxes, bureaucratic chains forged in legislative hands. And in the halls of Congress, the same descendants of planters now spoke of order, tradition, and states' rights. And while politics rewrote laws, another institution rewrote perception. The media, newspapers, and later radio told America what to remember and what to forget. They romanticized the Old South, invented heroes, erased guilt. The camera, when it arrived, showed progress, not pain. It broadcast the illusion of unity while silencing the cracks beneath it. All of it, the schools, the speeches, the headlines, worked in concert to do one thing: make injustice look normal, to make the architecture of power invisible. You were meant to believe that control was gone, that the system was fair now, that history had ended. But history doesn't end, it mutates. Every institution that followed the weeping time was built not to reveal, but to contain, to ensure the machine ran quietly, efficiently, invisibly. And even now, as you watch this, the same machinery hums beneath the world you walk through, reshaped, renamed, refined. Because the most effective form of control is education that convinces you you've never been controlled at all. When the chains fell silent, the words took their place. A nation doesn't maintain power by force alone. It does it through language, through the careful crafting of what can be said and what must never be spoken. After the Civil War, words became the new overseers. Servant, help, sharecropper, separate but equal. Each phrase a disguise, a euphemism designed to hide the same structure beneath a gentler name. The plantation was gone, but the grammar of hierarchy remained, encoded in speech, policy, and identity. Those who understood this shift knew something profound. Control the vocabulary, and you control the thought. The schools that rewrote history also rewired minds. Children were taught patriotism before empathy, pride before truth. The word freedom was repeated until it became hollow, a brand, not a birthright. Opportunity became a spell cast to hide inequality. Progress became the word that excused everything that came before. And so, a new kind of bondage emerged, psychological obedience. No whips, no walls, only the invisible cage of language. The newspapers learned to shape public thought with headlines that felt like facts. Words like riot instead of resistance, labor trouble instead of human struggle. Each choice not accidental, but strategic, calibrated to preserve a sense of order. It didn't end there. The 20th century perfected the art of linguistic control through advertising, politics, and policy. Public relations replaced propaganda. Collateral damage replaced massacre. Correctional facility replaced prison. This is how power hides, behind polished words that sound reasonable, humane, necessary. Even now, the systems born from that first rain-soaked auction still whisper through our vocabulary. When someone says, market forces, they echo the same cold arithmetic that once priced human lives. When you hear efficiency, remember, that was the plantation's logic too. You're told to be productive, to hustle, to earn your worth. But worth measured by whose standard? Productivity for whose profit? These are the same questions that were never meant to be asked, because asking them breaks the spell. Language is not neutral. It is architecture, a structure that shapes the boundaries of your thought. And the moment you recognize that, the structure begins to tremble. Because the real rebellion begins not with violence, but with vocabulary, with reclaiming the words that define your world. Every empire, ancient or modern, begins to collapse the moment its subjects stop speaking its language. At the dawn of the 20th century, the chains became wires. The plantation ledger became a laboratory notebook, and the minds of men, not their bodies, became the new territory to conquer. It started quietly with experiments. Men in white coats studying suggestion, persuasion, fear. Governments funding behavioral sciences. Corporations funding consumer research. Behind the glass, a revelation took shape. People didn't need to be forced to obey. They could be conditioned to. Austrian émigrés like Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, understood it first. If you could understand desire, you could control it. He called it public relations, but it was really the industrialization of the subconscious. Bernays sold wars as liberation, products as identity, and obedience as self-expression. He showed elites that with the right words, the right images, the right rhythm of fear and promise, entire populations could move like cattle toward any goal. The science of control had found its perfect disguise: choice. People were no longer told what to do, they were shown what to want. And that's the most efficient form of slavery ever invented, the one that feels like freedom. Factories turned into offices, overseers turned into managers. The new whip was psychological, expectation, comparison, debt, and the relentless image of success. Propaganda shifted from crude posters to luminous screens. It no longer shouted, it whispered. Wars became narratives. Consumption became duty. The new plantation was global now, a system that harvested attention, loyalty, and labor, while convincing each person that they were the master of their own fate. Every institution learned the formula. Governments used it to manage dissent. Corporations used it to engineer addiction. Media used it to keep the masses docile through cycles of outrage and relief. By the mid-century, obedience had become measurable. Psychologists like Stanley Milgram proved that ordinary people would commit acts of cruelty if instructed by authority. Others found that fear, especially fear of social exclusion, could control populations more effectively than any weapon. And through it all, the same quiet current pulsed beneath: the pursuit of order, efficiency, predictability, the very same virtues once praised on the Savannah plantations. That's why the weeping time still matters, because the science of obedience didn't erase its legacy, it perfected it. Today, the auctioneer doesn't stand on a platform, he sits behind an algorithm. The crowd doesn't watch with umbrellas, they scroll, they click, they consume, and every click is another bid in the marketplace of minds. You were told you were free, but freedom without awareness is just another experiment. So here's your test. Not in a lab, not in a field, but in your own reflection. Do you own your thoughts, or do they own you? After the laboratories came the mirrors. The great project of the New Age was not to build machines that moved faster. It was to build people who could be programmed. The 20th century's last invention was identity. Advertisers, psychologists, and politicians learned that a person who believes his value lies in how he appears will police himself better than any guard. The old plantation overseer no longer needed to shout. The consumer would do it to himself, chasing an image that could never be caught. Magazines taught men how to look powerful. Commercials told them what success smelled like. Schools measured intelligence as compliance. The idea of the individual, once a spark of freedom, became the perfect leash. Be yourself, they said, and then sold 1,000 definitions of what that self should be. Every profile, every purchase, every preference became a small confession. Bit by bit, industry learned to read desire like scripture. The camera, once used to record truth, now edits it. The mirror is no longer glass, it's a feed, an algorithm reflecting what the system wants you to crave next. Identity turned from birthright into marketplace. The man who once labored in the field now labors in the brand, curating, comparing, performing. Approval replaced dignity, visibility replaced worth. The plantation lives on in pixels, endless rows of faces striving under a sky of numbers, all competing for a light that never warms. And still the echo of 1859 hums beneath it. Back then, bodies were tagged with prices. Now, data is. Each click, each heartbeat on a smartwatch, each keystroke in a search bar adds to the same silent economy, ownership, disguised as personalization. The truth they never teach is that identity was designed to be fragile. The more uncertain you feel about who you are, the easier you are to sell to rule, to redirect. A man who doubts his reflection will buy anything that promises to complete it. That is why every screen glows with invitation, not to free you, but to feed you back to the machine. The product and the consumer have become one organism, circling the same hunger. Yet somewhere beneath all the noise, there's still that old question from Savannah's reign. What is a human life worth? In the 1800s, it was written in ink. Now, it's written in code. And the moment you start to see that code for what it is, not destiny, but design, you begin to rewrite it. The tents have returned. They're just made of glass and light now. No mud, no rain, only servers humming beneath cities, trading in the currency of your attention. Every click, every pause, every half second of hesitation on a scrolling screen, it all has value. You're being sold again, not as flesh and blood, but as behavior. Every data point is a whisper of who you are, or who they can make you become. The new auctioneer doesn't stand on a wooden block. He's an algorithm, trained to predict desire before you even feel it. He studies your history, your moods, your silence. Then he sells those insights to the highest bidder, a company, a campaign, a cause. What began in Savannah as an open transaction has become a silent one. The field has gone global. The buyer's invisible. You never hear the bids, only the echo in your feed. Ads tailored to your fears. Stories crafted to divide. Opinions injected to shape what you believe is your own. This is the final evolution of control, when manipulation feels like choice and surveillance feels like convenience. In 1859, human beings stood in the rain waiting for their names to be called. Now, we stand online, waiting for our notifications. Both moments, separated by centuries, run on the same logic. Your attention belongs to whoever can afford it. Governments collect your data in the name of safety. Corporations harvest it in the name of service. But the truth is older than both. Power thrives on knowledge, and knowledge of you is the most valuable form of control ever invented. The systems of ownership have never disappeared. They've just moved inward. The plantation became the platform. The whip became the feed. The overseer
became an algorithm tuned to one goal: keep you engaged. Because engagement is profit, and profit is power. But here's the paradox. You built the new plantation yourself. You filled it with your photos, your words, your desires. You handed over your own soul, one click at a time, to a machine that never sleeps and never forgets. They no longer need to cage you. You carry the cage in your pocket. And if you've made it this far, it means something in you already knows this. Some quiet rebellion inside you wants to look the system in the eye and ask, who owns me now? Pause for a moment. Look at the screen you're holding. That's not glass. That's the modern block. And every time you look into it, somewhere, someone is bidding.
Hope was supposed to be the light after the storm, but in the century that followed the weeping time, it became a commodity, a tool refined in the same factories that once processed fear. When the last plantation collapsed, the merchants of progress moved quickly. They discovered that despair was useful only when it led to purchase. So they bottled optimism, sold it in slogans, stitched it into flags. They learned that a man chasing a dream will run longer than a man fleeing a whip. Better life, New Deal, American Dream. These were the hymns of the new economy. Each promise glittered like redemption, but every path curved back to the same place: production, consumption, obedience. The same machine that once demanded labor now demanded belief. Factories needed morale. Governments needed patience. Markets needed faith. So a new clergy arose: motivational speakers, advertisers, politicians, priests of productivity, preaching salvation through effort. They told you happiness was just one purchase, one election, one self-improvement away. And if it didn't arrive, they said, the fault was yours. Hope turned inward, personal, profitable. It no longer meant liberation from injustice. It meant endurance within it. A tired worker could be pacified with the thought that tomorrow might finally reward him. A citizen could forgive corruption if convinced that the next leader, the next quarter, the next update would fix everything. Even religion adapted. The theology of suffering gave way to the gospel of prosperity. Pain was reframed as proof of future reward. Believe, they said, and your chains will turn to gold. And they did, just not for you. That is the genius of institutional hope. It never frees you. It keeps you waiting for better policies, for better jobs, for better algorithms, waiting so long that you forget to act. But authentic hope is dangerous because it demands change, not patience. It asks questions the system can't afford. Who profits from my waiting? What happens if I stop? Somewhere under the noise, the rain of Savannah still falls. Not a curse, but a rhythm. A reminder that every false dawn was engineered to keep you docile until the next auction begins. When you stop buying the promises, you start to see the structure behind them. And that's the first moment of real awakening, the realization that hope too was scripted. By the time the 20th century gave way to the 21st, every thread of control, money, language, education, belief, had been woven into a single fabric. It stretched across oceans, invisible but absolute. The overseer no longer wore a face. It was a system, a network of code and commerce that measured everything it touched. The promises were dazzling: connection, convenience, progress. We built the wires ourselves, one tap and swipe at a time, until the network surrounded us like air. Nations called it globalization. Economists called it growth. But beneath the graphs and trade routes pulsed the same old equation: extract, profit, repeat. Factories moved where hands were cheapest. Data centers rose where silence was deepest. The marketplace became a map of supply chains tracing back to the same truth Savannah once revealed. Someone, somewhere, still pays the hidden cost of another man's comfort. Technology made it elegant. Algorithms forecast demand, satellites trace resources, currencies flicker across borders faster than conscience can travel. Each transaction clean, bloodless, efficient. The auctioneer speaks now in binary. The buyers wear badges of philanthropy. The product is still human time, sold in hours, rented in clicks, mined in attention. And because this machine is everywhere, resistance feels impossible. Your work feeds it, Your leisure fuels it. Even your outrage becomes content monetized by the very forces you oppose. The system no longer punishes rebellion. It absorbs it, turns it into trend and profit. The genius of the global machine is its shape. It has none. You cannot topple what you cannot locate. It exists in policies, in cloud servers, in the psychology of wanting more. Every device hums the same lullaby. You are part of something vast, inevitable, good. But beneath that harmony runs an older hum, the echo of rain on canvas, the murmurs of 436 souls counted and sold. The coordinates have changed, but the logic remains. People reduced to numbers, systems built to hide the counting. And yet, awareness cracks even the hardest code. The machine survives on one condition, that you believe it is the world, not just a design. The moment you see the pattern, the moment you name it, you stand outside it. That is where real power begins, not in destroying the network, but in remembering that it was made by human hands and can be unmade by them.
The empire of wires and numbers didn't need to conquer you with armies. It only needed to make you alone. At first, the connection felt miraculous. A screen glowing in the dark, millions of voices a fingertip away. But slowly, the world folded inward. Conversation turned into comment. Community turned into feed. And the more you connected, the more isolated you became. Loneliness became the quiet fuel of the modern economy. The more disconnected you feel, the more you reach for the glow, for affirmation, for belonging, for the next small hit of relevance. The machine counts those seconds, translates them into data, and sells them. The same cycle of extraction that once took place in the fields now plays out in the mind. It is not an accident. Engineers study how long an empty heart can hover before it clicks. Psychologists map the thresholds of attention, the curve of sadness that drives engagement. Every scroll, every like, every ache to be seen, harvested. Loneliness has become the new cotton, endlessly renewable. And while you sit surrounded by images of friends, celebrities, ideals, you begin to measure your worth against the projection, not the person. The world becomes a hall of mirrors, each reflection asking you to buy, to post, to prove that you exist. This is how the global machine maintains obedience, through comparison. You are never enough, never complete, never at rest. Because a satisfied person is a dangerous one. He stops moving, stops consuming, starts thinking. Savannah's rain still falls in this digital solitude. The people in the tents were forced to stand together, bound by chains. You stand alone, bound by choice, or what you believe is choice. Their cries were silenced by law. Yours are drowned by noise. And yet, beneath the loneliness, something stirs. The faint pulse of memory. The intuition that the hunger for connection was never meant to be sold. Every moment you turn from the screen and listen, to the wind, to your own breath, you defy the machine. That act, small as it seems, is the beginning of liberation. Because the machine cannot profit from silence. It cannot measure presence. It cannot own what is shared freely, human to human. Remember this. Isolation is not a side effect, it is the design. And the cure isn't found online. It's in the spaces the machine cannot touch. The final fortress of freedom was always truth. Not the polished kind written in textbooks, but the raw pulse of knowing what is and what is not. Once that distinction anchored humanity, but as the machine evolved, it discovered something more efficient than censorship: confusion. In Savannah, 1859, truth was simple and unbearable. Human beings were sold. Everyone saw it.
No one could deny it. But today, the world doesn't need to hide its crimes. It only needs to bury them in noise. When information became infinite, truth became relative. Every fact was met with a counterfact, every image with a doctored twin. The mind, overwhelmed, stopped discerning and started drifting. That's the real conquest of the modern age, not suppression, but saturation. News feeds no longer inform, they perform. Algorithms learn their biases, then serve you narratives designed to flatter them. You're not being told the truth, you're being told your truth, customized, curated, and profitable. In this endless mirror maze, every opinion feels righteous, every argument feels urgent, and nothing changes. Confusion is control. A population that cannot agree on reality cannot unite against those who distort it. And while people battle over fragments, politics, ideology, identity, the architects of the system quietly continue their work, unbothered. Division is their camouflage. Even language itself fractures under this weight. Words lose meaning. Freedom, justice, equality. They become slogans, tools, marketing. The more they are used, the less they signify. And in that emptiness, manipulation thrives. The same psychology that once justified slavery, some lives matter more than others, never disappeared. It simply learned to wear new words, to argue on both sides of every issue, to make truth feel impossible. Because when men believe there's no truth at all, they'll accept whatever power tells them. But here's the paradox. Buried in the chaos, truth still exists. It's quieter now, harder to find, but it hums beneath the noise like the heartbeat beneath thunder. You feel it when you pause the scroll, when you read history unfiltered, when you sense the difference between information and wisdom. That pulse, the refusal to surrender to confusion, is the oldest rebellion there is. It's what survived every empire, every plantation, every algorithm. It's the rain still falling in Savannah. You can drown in the flood, or you can listen for the rhythm beneath it. That rhythm is reality. It has no owner, no sponsor, no price. The war on truth only wins if you stop hearing it. This is the part no one can do for you. Every descent reaches a point where the tunnels stop leading outward and start leading inward. The noise fades, the screen dims, and you find yourself staring at a reflection you didn't expect to see, your own. For hours, we've walked through history, auction blocks, boardrooms, laboratories, algorithms, but all of it, every stage of control, was built around a single assumption, that you would never stop long enough to ask what part of this still lives in me. Because systems are not immortal, they survive through participation, through habit, through belief. Every choice to look away, every silence offered in comfort, every small obedience, it's the mortar that keeps the walls standing. So stop, right now. Forget the feed, forget the comments, forget the next clip waiting to play. Just breathe and ask yourself, who benefits from my attention? If you can answer that honestly, even once, you've already stepped outside the cage. This is not about guilt, it's about clarity. You didn't build the system, but you inherit it, live in it, sustain it. The only way out is to see it fully, without panic, without denial. That's the turning point. Awareness. It's quieter than anger, sharper than fear. It doesn't shout, it notices. If this story has moved you, write something simple in the comments, your own reflection, a thought, a single word that names what you're seeing now. Because when you put truth into words, even fragile ones, it becomes real. You stop being a spectator, you become a witness. This moment matters. Savannah's rain still falls somewhere in you, the echo of all those whose worth was once written in numbers. They couldn't speak freely, but you can. Their silence built the world. Your voice can unmake it. This is where the descent stops being about history and starts being about choice. What you believe, what you sustain, what you refuse. The next chapter is not about them, it's about you. And from here on, the climb begins. Not toward comfort, but toward sight. Awareness always begins quietly. No thunderclap, no divine trumpet, just a shift in how things look. The streets you've walked 1,000 times suddenly reveal their scaffolding, the advertisements glowing like commandments, the architecture of money and message intertwined. You see how everything around you hums with purpose, how every signal is designed to steer. The first reaction is anger. That's natural. You want to rip away the screens, expose the machine, shout the truth until the walls fall. But rage alone still feeds the system. It's noise, and the machine eats noise. What starves it is clarity. Calm, deliberate, inconvenient clarity. When you begin to see, the world doesn't change, the veil does. You realize the same hands that once held whips now hold algorithms, pens, policies. They're not evil caricatures, they're ordinary people fulfilling roles, just as others did on those rain-soaked days in Savannah. The real enemy was never the individual, it was always the idea that some lives exist to serve others. That idea still circulates, dressed in modern words: efficiency, growth, optimization. You'll notice it everywhere, in the language of business meetings that call workers resources, in the politics that trade compassion for calculation, in the entertainment that sells conflict as connection. These are not coincidences, they're continuities. The plantation logic reborn in 1,000 polished forms. But sight is power. The moment you see the pattern, you can refuse to repeat it. You start choosing what you give your time to, what you amplify, what you ignore. You begin to spend your attention as if it were sacred, because it is. Every second you reclaim becomes an act of rebellion against centuries of design. Others will sense the change in you. They'll call it detachment, cynicism, awakening, whatever word fits their comfort. Let them. You are not abandoning the world, you are finally seeing it. And the more you see, the more you realize that truth was never lost. It was simply hidden behind convenience. The weeping time is not just history, it is a map of the mind. Its echoes live in every institution that treats humanity as commodity. But the eyes that can recognize that map can also draw a new one. And when enough people see, the system starts to tremble, not from revolt, but from recognition. Because power cannot survive being seen for what it is.
When a single person wakes, the world barely stirs. But when awareness spreads, quietly, without permission, it begins to rewrite the landscape. No slogans, no revolutions, just a change in how people see. At first, it looks small. Someone stops sharing the outrage. Someone questions a headline. Someone refuses to measure worth by wealth. But these small refusals multiply like cracks in glass. The structure of control depends on belief. Belief in inevitability, in the permanence of systems. Once that belief falters, the facade weakens. The architects of every age understood this. That's why they built monuments, printed textbooks, filmed myths, to make their power look eternal. But eternity is a fragile illusion. It only lasts as long as people stop asking where the story came from. Now, everywhere, the old narratives begin to fray. Workers refuse to be called resources. Communities rebuild solidarity outside the marketplace. Truth tellers document what was meant to stay buried. Each act of seeing, of naming, becomes a quiet restoration of dignity. You start to realize that liberation was never about overthrowing tyrants. It was about dissolving the obedience that sustains them. Empires don't crumble from attack. They crumble when the people inside them stop believing their logic. The same rain that soaked Savannah still falls on cities built from its legacy. It falls on boardrooms, on schools, on server farms. It falls on you. And beneath it, the soil remembers. Not vengeance, memory. Memory is what keeps us human. The turning of the tide doesn't look like chaos. It looks like stillness returning to places long filled with noise. It looks like men and women no longer afraid to listen to their own conscience before they listen to command. It looks like refusal, not in anger, but in peace. That's what the machine fears most. People who are no longer predictable, no longer programmable. People who understand that the auction was never destiny. It was a decision, repeated until it looked natural. The tide is turning, not because someone decreed it, but because enough of us finally remembered what was forgotten. That freedom is not a gift or a product. It is perception. Once you see clearly, no system can truly own you again.
When the veil falls, the question that remains is simple but immense. What do we build now? Awareness alone isn't enough. It clears the ground, but the soil still waits. For generations, meaning was handed down by institutions, church, state, market, each offering a pre-written script. The end of obedience leaves silence, and silence can be frightening. But silence is also fertile. Reconstruction begins not with policy or technology, but with values reclaimed from distortion. Work becomes creation again, not servitude. Knowledge becomes service, not weapon. Wealth becomes stewardship, not possession. These sound like abstractions, yet they are as concrete as the cotton fields once were. Every transaction, every conversation, every classroom either repeats the old logic or writes a new one. To rebuild, we first restore language. We stop calling people human capital. Stop calling nature resource. Stop calling care charity. Words are blueprints. Change them and you change the architecture of reality. Then we restore connection. Slow, imperfect, human connection. Machines can imitate it, monetize it, but they cannot feel it. Connection is the one currency the global machine can't counterfeit. You may think one life too small to matter against the weight of history. So did the ones who stood in that Savannah rain. Yet even they whispered to each other, sang to each other, passed hope through chains. Every act of genuine relation was an act of rebellion. The same is true now. Reconstruction is not about purity or perfection. It's about direction. It asks, will this choice make someone more free or more dependent, more aware or more numb? Answer that honestly each day and the pattern begins to shift. When you start to live as if every person you meet carries untold histories, the hierarchy dissolves. When you see the land not as commodity, but as witness, extraction turns to care. When you measure progress by empathy instead of efficiency, the old empire has nothing left to sell you. The machine was built from forgetting. Reconstruction grows from remembrance. It does not erase the weeping time. It learns from it, refuses to let it repeat. Meaning, once commodified, becomes sacred again, not by decree, but by use. A new order does not need new rulers. It needs people who remember what power is for, to protect, not to possess.
When enough people begin to remember, something remarkable happens. The lines that once divided start to dissolve. Power no longer flows upward through fear, it circulates outward through connection. This is not utopia, it's awareness at scale. The realization that every life is a thread in the same fabric, that no comfort is clean if it rests on another's suffering. The machinery of separation, race, class, creed, loses its voltage once people see how it was wired to keep them apart. Shared consciousness doesn't mean sameness. It means coherence. It means that truth can move between us without distortion, because it's not owned, not branded, not edited for profit. It means that empathy, once mocked as weakness, is recognized as the highest form of intelligence because it refuses to participate in dehumanization. You start to see this new awareness flickering everywhere. In communities rebuilding trust without permission, in workers deciding that time is more valuable than output, in students who demand not just information but understanding. Each act, small, almost invisible, yet together they form a network more powerful than any algorithm, the network of human conscience. Even technology begins to change shape under it. The same tools that once harvested attention can be used to share knowledge freely, to record histories once erased, to amplify those long silenced. When used with consciousness, the machine becomes a mirror again, one that reflects, not consumes. This is the reversal the architects of control never predicted, that the very systems built to monitor humanity could be turned toward awareness. Data used for transparency, not manipulation. Code written for equity, not extraction. The same network that once auctioned your attention becomes the web through which empathy travels. It won't be clean. Power never relinquishes easily. There will be distortion, resistance, corruption, but consciousness has a force that numbers can't measure. It moves through story, through memory, through the quiet choice to care. The world does not need to be remade from scratch. It needs to be remembered as one body. And when enough of that body wakes, the auction ends for good, not by decree, but because there's no one left willing to bid. The rain that once fell in Savannah now falls on a world learning to listen to its ghosts, its wounds, its possibilities. That sound is not mourning anymore, it's awakening.
The storm has circled back. 166 years later, the same air presses down on the Georgia coast. The same smell of salt and soil rises from the ground. Savannah still breathes beneath its moss and marble. The rain still falls. If you stand there long enough, at the edge of the old fairgrounds where 436 names once echoed, you can feel the pulse that began it all. Not a haunting, but a memory waiting to be honored. Each drop that hits the earth is a syllable of truth finally spoken. The weeping time never asked for pity, it asked for witness. Look at how far the echo traveled, from tents to towers, from ledgers to screens. Every age recreates the auction in its own language, but every age also carries the seed of refusal. The chain is only as strong as the silence that surrounds it, and silence has broken. You can hear it in the classrooms teaching what was once forbidden to teach, in the documentaries and songs reclaiming the stolen stories, in the hands that plant, repair, and write, refusing to forget. The rain that once mourned now cleanses. It falls on new generations who walk those fields not as property, but as witnesses. It falls on the children of the enslaved and the enslavers alike, reminding them that history isn't inheritance, it's instruction. It tells us, you were made to remember, not to repeat. And if you listen closely,
beneath the thunder, you'll hear another sound, the steady heartbeat of awareness, spreading across cities and screens, carrying the same message whispered in every act of truth. Never again measured, never again sold. This is where the descent ends, not in despair, but in vision. Because once you've seen the architecture of control, you can build something else. A world where value isn't extracted, but shared, where progress isn't purchased, but lived. The story of Savannah isn't just a tragedy buried in time. It's a mirror, showing what happens when humanity forgets itself and what becomes possible when it remembers. The rain keeps falling. It always will. Not as punishment, but as promise. A rhythm older than empire, washing the names clean, whispering the only truth that outlasts every system. No one owns another soul. Not then, not now, not ever.